The Manilow Method podcast is a production by Logan Allen and me, Barry Harris. Now, let's start the show.
What is going on, everybody? We're back here. We're deep now into Season 2 of the Manilow Method. I'm your host, Logan Allen. That's my co-host, Mr. Barry Harris. And we're back. We have another banger of an episode for you today. This is one of our favorite albums in the Manilow catalog, and it's one of the more underappreciated albums in the Manilow catalog. Yes, today we are talking about Manilow 85, the RCA record, released on RCA Records, released in March of 1985. Now, this thing was recorded in a plethora of different studios. I wrote down all the places it was recorded. There were 3 studios in Hollywood, 4 in Los Angeles, 1 in West Hollywood, 1 in North Hollywood, 2 in New York City, 1 in Farmington Hills, Michigan, and 1 in Baltimore, Maryland. So this album made the rounds of the United States as it was being made, and yeah, it's the pinnacle of the 80s sound, how Manilow adapted to the 80s wave of drum machines and synthesizers, and you're going to hear those phrases the entire time we talk about this episode. So Barry, I know that this is one of your favorite albums and one of the episodes you've been looking forward to on this show for a long time, so geek out. What do you love about this album right off the bat? As you mentioned, Logan, this is one of my favorite eras of Barry Manilow, and as you mentioned, RCA Records, this is the first time on our program that we have covered one of Barry Manilow's records that was not released on Arista Records. That was his home of many, many years. Barry Manilow famously was the first #1 hit artist for Arista Records in 1975, and he had a long relationship on and off, but mostly on until the year 2011 when he separated and went out on his own. This was the first time that Barry Manilow ever departed from Arista Records, and it gave him pretty much full creative control over the record, and he sought to make his own pop album. So what I really love about this is that it has everything about Barry Manilow that you would expect and would want to hear on a Barry Manilow record, but it also adds and integrates everything that was modern for the times in terms of synthesizers and programming. And a lot of times when any musician attempts to be contemporary, there is a risk that in retrospect what sounded like a great idea at the time may not necessarily be the best idea in review. However, we could say that this classic has aged very well. You know, I think there are some sounds that are definitely emblematic of the day in which it was created, but I think for a lot of music listeners, especially in the 2010s, the 80s sound got popular all over again. Yeah. So if you like the 1980s, you're going to love this record. And I have a feeling that there are people who are watching us, there are people who are regular Barry Manilow fans who know exactly what we're talking about when we say this is one of his greatest pop albums ever. Absolutely.
There are others in our listening and viewing audience that has never heard of this album before. And the tragic reason why you don't know about this album is because this album was not promoted by the record company. What happened was there were executives at RCA Records that signed Manilow to the deal. And by the time the album came out, those executives were no longer with the company. This is a story that Barry Manilow himself told when he was on QVC promoting the greatest songs of the 80s, and it just so happened that they packaged that as a special for QVC along with a reissue of the Manilow self-titled 1985 album, and he made that remark during that interview. So what's tragic about that is that we don't know how these songs could have fared if they were given a chance. Now, we can say that In Search of Love got a single release, I'm Your Man got a single release, but just because they got released, they may not have put their whole heart and effort into giving it the promotion it deserved. And one of the things you mentioned, Logan, is that this album has so many locations in which it was recorded. That's a product of the fact that Manilow was on tour when he produced this album. So therefore, it was necessary to record during the afternoons when he had a show. He said it was very exciting, but also very challenging at the same time. So let's talk about how this was released. Of course, there was the good old vinyl copy. Logan, I think you've got one right there.
It's the only physical copy I have of this album. Shout out to my girlfriend. She found this one for me.
Oh, way to go.
And then our back cover here.
Yeah, that's also a great back album cover, too.
Yes, it is. What else do you have?
So we have something that's very traditional. Here is a cassette. This is a compact cassette. Let me make sure there's no glare on it so you all out there could actually see this. But this is a standard compact cassette that you can play in the car, and we all know what cassettes are. Now, this is where things start getting interesting. I have something here that a lot of people might not know about. We've talked about this before if you watched our program. This is an 8-track. It goes into the stereo. It's a cassette cartridge. You stick it in and it plays it. Now, here's what is notable about this 8-track, Logan, and everybody out there. This is the last commercially manufactured 8-track for Barry Manilow. This is it. We've really checked this one. We can't find anything else that came after this. We certainly will invite anybody in our audience who knows of one that was released afterwards. Please let us know. But we are very certain this was the last 8-track ever released. And one thing that, if we remember at the end to come back to this, the track listing is all mixed up. It's really funny, and I think it'll be funny to read this at the end. And if you, especially for those of you who love this album like I do, this order makes no sense whatsoever. So maybe if we remember, I'll read that to you. But something big happened here for the release of Manilow RCA, and that is the CD. Now, I'm not holding up a CD. Logan, have you ever seen one of these?
It looks like a cereal box. I don't know. What is it?
Yeah, it's called a long box.
Interesting.
And when they first came out with CDs, they actually manufactured them and they packaged them in these long boxes.
That is weird.
Well, it was practical at the time because they thought, how can we stop people from stealing these things from the store?
Oh, make them huge.
Exactly. You can't put it under your jacket. Now, there were some environmental concerns, and by the early 1990s, they stopped making long boxes, and I think you might know the rest of the story. They came with those plastic cases that they have a key at the cash register to open up. So that was how they changed their theft deterrent for CDs. But until then, they manufactured CDs in long boxes, and luckily, my parents, when they added compact discs to their collection, they had the foresight to not throw it in the garbage. So they have a collection of all the long boxes that were ever manufactured for Barry Manilow. So I thought that was something fun to show to everybody. So now let's actually get to the actual compact discs. This was the original issue of the compact disc from 1985. I'll open it up and you can see it. It's got a nice standard RCA compact disc right here. And I will say this was exceedingly rare for many years. This would go for north of $100 on eBay back in the 1990s because this was the only way for you to hear it digitally. Now, fortunately, I mentioned this, I alluded to this earlier, that in 2008, when the greatest songs of the 80s came out, QVC offered greatest songs of the 80s with this package as a bonus disc. It is a remastered version of the Manilow self-titled RCA album, and here is a back cover. So it was nice to finally, after all these years, have it back in print and no longer be at obscurity. And so when music went to the streaming platforms, Manilow RCA was a part of that inclusion. All of the Manilow RCA record was added to streaming services shortly after its remastering.
Real quick, I want to say one thing that it's interesting. A re-release of a classic Manilow record didn't have a just blank or special re-release back cover. It had something very similar to the original back cover, because we talk about the Barry Manilow Masters from the 90s having something totally different, and they'll have, a contemporary picture of Manilow himself and maybe a note about the album or whatever. So it's interesting to see an album that they released as a special bonus gift with a QVC purchase had something similar to what was released in the 80s.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And yeah, there's nothing particularly remarkable about this reissue. And you're right, that was common, that there would be some sort of contemporary either commentary or photographs, and especially letting you know of the ways to connect to Barry Manilow on the internet in whatever form it existed at that time. But another important thing to mention about the Manilow RCA album is that it's the first record that Manilow ever released that has different international versions. We will hold that and talk about that at the end of our discussion. We will talk about the international versions of the Manilow album. We will talk about how they are different in detail. But of course, we would not be complete without talking about the music book. There was a music book released to the Manilow record. And it's a pretty good transcription. I used them to learn all of these songs when I was a kid. So very fortunate that was made available publicly, because sometimes not everything gets released. Sometimes they release music books and the transcriptions are not close to what is on the record. But this one is a really great one. But last but not least, I want to mention something that makes today's episode extra special. One of the things that I believe, and we believe here at the Manilow Method, that our primary concern is to always include the artist's perspective. What was Manilow thinking when he wrote these songs? How does he feel about these songs? And we try to go back into the archives of interviews, appearances, to find out what he said about each of the songs, so that way we could put them in proper context and share his point of view. We have the Holy Grail here. This is a magazine called Tracks. This is apparently available with the purchase of a record or a CD from independent record stores. And Tracks magazine in 1985 featured the Manilow RCA album, and this magazine contains complete track-by-track commentary by Barry Manilow himself. So therefore, we will be able to include Manilow's voice in today's program. He gave thoughts and reflections on each one of the tracks, and we are going to share and summarize some of his thoughts and feelings and present them as we go through each of the tracks.
Okay, I think it's important now. We have a laundry list of people that did stuff. This is the first time in a while I've had a double-sided sheet of names, so I'm going to try to rock through this as fast as we can. We're going to hear some instruments on this album that we haven't really talked about yet on our show, so this is going to be a very interesting discussion today. Here we go. Barry Manilow does lead vocals. He does keyboards on track 1. He does drums on track 1. That is very interesting. He does the grand piano on track 2, background vocals on track 4, and he does the rhythm track arrangement on track 8. Raymond Crossley plays the grand piano on track 1. Howie Rice, a name that we're going to talk about that's all over this record, plays keyboards on tracks 1 through 3, 9, and 10. He plays bass on tracks 1, 3, and 10. He plays the drums on tracks 1 and 9. He does the string arrangement on tracks 2, 3, and 9, and he plays guitar on tracks 3, 9, and 10. And then John Philip Chenale, I think I got that right, Barry, thank you. He does additional synthesizers on track 1, keyboards on track 6, and he does the synthesizer programming on track 8. You'll notice we're saying synthesizer a lot on this, and I think something that's kind of a hallmark of this record is, if you're going to say, how did Barry Manilow adapt to the 80s, synthesizer is the word I think that could most well sum up what he did with the 80s. Kevin DeSimone, a name that we hold very fondly in our hearts here at the Manilow Method. He did a lot on this record. On track 4, he played a ton of instruments. He played the Yamaha Grand Piano, the Yamaha DX7, the Synclavier, the Roland Super Jupiter, and the Lindrum. He played all those things on track 4, and we'll talk about that when we get there. And he also did background vocals on tracks 4 through 6. And now here's a name that's coming up on our podcast. that we know nowadays in the modern Manilow universe. Ron Pedley, the fantastic keyboard player Ron Pedley, did the Oberheimer programming on track 4, the keyboards on tracks 5 and 6, and the acoustic piano on track 10. Ron Pedley is still active in Barry Manilow's band today. If you were to see Barry Manilow right now, Ron Pedley would be on stage. Kevin Jones did the synclavier programming on track 4 and keyboards on track 5. Randy Kerber, another name that pops up a lot, did the keyboards on track 5, the acoustic piano on tracks 7 and 8, and the Yamaha TX816 on track 7. That's a lot of numbers. Victor Vanacore, Manilow's hero Victor Vanacore, does the keyboards on tracks 5 and 6, and he was the orchestra conductor on track 8. George Duke played the synclavier 2 on track 7. John Galutin, something like that, played the keyboards on track 9. John Pondell, another name that has come up a bunch, plays the guitars on tracks 4 through 6 and track 8. Paul Jackson Jr., a name that you hear us reference a lot, especially in the 80s era of Barry Manilow, played the acoustic guitar and rhythm guitar on track 7. Michael Landau, another name that's come up before, plays the lead guitar on track 7, and then Neil Stubenhaus played bass on tracks 2 and 8. Mark Levine played additional bass on track 4 and bass on tracks 5 and 6. And then we need a bell. Will Lee played bass on tracks 5 and 6. Ready Freddie Washington played bass on track 7. LeQuint Duke Job played bass on track 9. John Robinson played drums on tracks 1, 3, and 7. Rick Schlosser played drums on track 2. And Bud Harner, another huge name in the 80s Manilow era, played drums on tracks 4 through 6, 8, and 10, and he did the drum programming on track 4. Peter Moshe did the drum programming on tracks 5, 6, 8, and 10. Kerry Ashby played the drums on track 9. Terrell Santiel, or Sanchel, however, I don't know. This is very off the cuff, folks. He played percussion on tracks 1, 3, 9, and 10. Now we're finally flipping over this page. That was side 1. Here we go. Paulino DaCosta did percussion on track 5 and 6. Joel Peskin did the saxophone on track 8, one of my favorite parts of this record. Barry Fasman did the string arrangements for tracks 2, 3, and 9. Alan Faust did the string arrangement for 5 and 6. George Del Barrio did the string arrangement for track 7. Bill Hughes was the string contractor for track 7. Bob Gaudio, we talked about Bob Gaudio on our If I Should Love Again discussion. Go back and check that guy out. That was a fun conversation. Bob Gaudio did the rhythm track arrangement on track 8. Artie Butler, ring the other bell, he did the orchestra arrangement on track 8. Sean Harris was the orchestra contractor on track 8 and the string contractor on track 9. Billy Hughes, now we get into the background vocal section. Billy Hughes, John Lind, and Jason Sheff all did background vocals on tracks 1 through 3, 9, and 10. And a personal connection I have to Jason Sheff is he went on to be the tenor vocalist and bass player for the band Chicago, who we got to see live a few times with him. He is fantastic there, and he's fantastic on this record. Luther and Orrin Waters did background vocals on tracks 2, 3, 9, and 10. Tommy Funderburk, Barry Hirschberg, and James Jolis, we've got a third bell up here, they did background vocals on tracks 5 and 6. Tom Kelly did background vocals on 5, 6, and 8. That's a name that shows up a lot as well. And then Bob Carlisle and Steve George did background vocals on track 8, and Muffy Hendrix does a guest vocal feature on track 9. Mic drop. That was a lot of people. And I think that might have something to do with the fact that this was done in all different pockets of the country, in so many different studios when they had time. That's why they had to bring in so many people. So I think without further ado, we're ready to get into the track list here. We're starting off with a big track, a track that more people nowadays might know than they might have a few years ago. This is track 1, I'm Your Man, written by Barry Manilow, Howie Rice, and Alan Rich. And the reason I say that it might be a little more well-known nowadays than it used to be is this song has been a live staple in Manilow concerts for about the past 2 years or so. He brought it back at Radio City Music Hall in early 2024, and every night this song has been a staple towards the beginning of the shows. I think it's very interesting that he chose a song from this era to bring back and feature in his modern presentations. So, as I said earlier, this album is my answer to if somebody asks, what did Barry Manilow do in the 80s? I'll show them I'm Your Man. Like, it is the pinnacle of drum machines and loops and synthesizers. I really think that the percussion parts and the drum machines kind of drive this song forward, because in each ear you've got different parts happening. You've got things off in the distance, you've got things really present, you have all sorts of layers happening throughout the entire song, not just in certain sections. So I think this song was a great example of Manilow exploring some new toys. I think that's the best way to describe this track. And it's very rare to hear him do this song live and sing it in the lower register, because it's all sung, don't have to look no more, on the record. But now he sings it live, don't have to look no more. So this song is very different from how they do it live and how it's on the record. Barry, here we go. This is where you get to open up on one of your favorite records. What do you think of I'm Your Man?
Yeah, well, clearly it's unlike anything he had ever done up until that point, because it was driven by a synthesizer experiment. So here's where I'm going to start going to some quotes from the Tracks magazine interview, because there's so much great commentary that puts a lot of this into context. So first off, talking about the entire album, he said that, quote, we approach this album much differently than the other albums because instead of big orchestras, we use smaller bands filled with synthesizers, drum machines, and all of the instruments that are so popular now. I had dabbled on that on other albums, but not as much as on this one. So the sound's a little more aggressive than any of the other albums I've ever made. I think that, so now adding my commentary, that I feel that this album, Manilow RCA, picks up artistically where he left off with Here Comes the Night.
Yeah.
This is bringing that forward. And to get into I'm Your Man itself, it's remarkable because of the structure of the song. So the first notes that we hear is the C minor pentatonic scale descending. That's what you hear. And here I'm not playing it correctly. I'm still not playing it correctly. There we go.
There you go.
Thank you. That's so funny.
I think we keep that in. That's awesome.
We should. So for real now, it goes like this.
First try.
Got it on the first try. Yep. And I think that what that tells me is that we might be thinking of the blues, and all we hear is just the 1 chord and the 4 chord and the 5th chord. So it's the blues. That's the foundation of the verses till it gets to the chorus. You always said you liked the way that I loved you before. And even then, we're not introducing too many new ideas. We're very limited to the pieces of information we're being fed, at least musically. And so I want to get into some of what Manilow wrote about this and what he said. What he mentioned is that I'm Your Man was the final song that he wrote for the album. He said that they started it in the middle of the album process and they never completed it. And as they were finishing other songs, he kept thinking about it when they were getting to the end of the record. So he asked his collaborators, Howie Rice and Alan Rich. Alan Rich was the lyricist they brought in to collaborate on this album. He asked if they could come back and finish the song. And let me quote directly from Manilow here. He said, quote, "It's an interesting song in that we wrote it based on a drum machine program. I've never done that before. We set the drum machine to a very infectious rhythm pattern, and then we wrote the song around it. So it's not structured like your basic song would be structured. It sort of has layer upon layer upon layer based on this very infectious drum machine pattern. So even though it was the last song we wrote, it starts off the album because it's sort of an introduction. The lyrics sort of introduces the album." And so now to add my thought to this is really key because Manilow, I feel, is
really big about the opening song, making sure that the first song you hear sets the tone for what you're about to hear. Now, this is a very straightforward pop album. There is no specific concept that ties all of the songs together, but yet this is a big statement to start it out. And like mentioned, this was a bit of a comeback record because the album that came before Manilow RCA was Paradise Cafe. I mentioned Here Comes the Night, which came out in 1982. That was a rock and roll record. And then he did a 180 and did Paradise Cafe, a straight up jazz record. So, of course, there were completely different expectations for 2 a.m. Paradise Cafe, in that none of the songs were going to be chart-topping pop singles. That's not what he was making. So this was his first foray back into it, and I feel like this song, the lyrics are very empowering, and I think for somebody who's stepping back into the arena of making pop records, he really wanted to make a big splash. And like I said, we could only wonder what would have happened if this had been promoted more heavily, if this had gotten wider airplay. Would this have made an impact? We might never know the answer to that.
I think it's interesting that you see through the late 70s, he's on top of the world with all these songs. This one's for you, Copacabana, Even Now. And you come into the 80s, you get I Made It Through the Rain, you get the old songs, Let's Hang On, and he's still on top of the world doing stadium shows. And then Paradise Cafe happens, and that's where he goes away from making the big pop records. And then he comes back into the pop world, you could say, and it doesn't get the widespread promotion or acclaim that the most recent strictly pop records had. And I think there's something to say for that, in the fact that maybe that's a reason why the later 80s aren't very well known, is because Paradise Cafe was received well in the fan base, but then Manilow RCA wasn't really promoted, and then sequential albums after that, Swing Street, the 1989 album, those are kind of more considered fan favorites rather than public favorites. I think that's a good argument to make there. Okay, we're a ways into this. That was track 1, ladies and gentlemen. This is definitely going to be 2 parts. Here we go, Barry. Track 2. This is a great track as well. This is It's All Behind Us Now, once again written by Barry Manilow, Howie Rice, and Alan Rich, suggesting that this song maybe did come from the second half of the writing sessions for this record. I gotta say, the opening for this is classic Manilow. But the one thing I will say about it, even though it is a piano intro, it's a rather long intro. In fact, the vocals don't come in until 36 seconds in. That is pretty unheard of, especially for the fact when Manilow would usually have a piano intro in the 70s, it would be a few bars and then he was right in it because they were trying to get that thing on the radio. And with this not being a single release, I think it makes sense how it's a little bit of tasting a break of the mold. And having a bit of a more thought out, more complex intro. Barry, what do you think of this deep track?
You know, this particular track really speaks to me because it's an ordinary track. And in fact, this is interesting. To go to the quote from Manilow's Tracks Magazine interview, he says that, quote, "This was the first song that the three of us ever wrote together," meaning Howie Rice, Alan Rich, and Barry Manilow, and it is much more of a standard-sounding ballad. It's got a beautiful lyric, it's got a real nice melody to it, there's nothing really different or unique about the song. But I beg to differ because there is something that is a bit of a twist, and I wonder if this is something that Manilow injected into the song. So, of course, as you would expect, the song modulates at the end. It repeats the chorus in a different key. That's always something you hear in a lot of Manilow songs. But what's interesting is the way this is done, because he teases it throughout the song. Because it starts off in the key of C, and the first verse, the first chorus is in C. But then when it gets to the second verse, it modulates up to E flat. So that's a minor third up. He does the entire second verse in the new key, but then immediately transitions down back to C for the chorus. He hits the bridge and then modulates it to E flat for the final chorus. So he put a twist on his usual formula in a way that is very pleasing. And so in terms of a really great Manilow track, a great Manilow love song that people might not know very well, this song is a great example of something that they could listen to. And the other thing I just want to mention about this particular track is that I think this shows how it wasn't just synthesizers, it's actually a hybrid. It's synthesizers and an orchestra. And I think they're integrated very well. So it still has the sweeping feeling that you would hear if there were just strings on here, but now you add synthesizers and stabs on these synth pads. And I think that actually works really well. Like I said, this is a very modern style for Barry Manilow, but yet at the same time, it's the same old kind of Barry Manilow ballad that people would expect and would want to hear. So I thought he really pulled it off very well here on It's All Behind Us Now.
So something I specifically wrote down, and we've kind of alluded to this is Here Comes the Night on steroids, continued part 2, however we want to phrase that, and I actually wrote that down for this track. And something that kind of is a thread between Here Comes the Night and this album is that a lot of the vocals are up in a very high register, in a tenor register, really. And that's not very common for Manilow following this era. As you get into the 90s, it's a little more the Manilow range we know today. So I really do think that even this song specifically is kind of if the title track from Here Comes the Night was done 3 years later. I really, really think that this is a continuation of his pop sensibilities. And again, we've talked about him not following trends, just adapting to the times. And I think there's a very clear difference between the two, and it's very well done on this track. Now, that was one of your favorites from this album. Let's talk about one of my favorites from this album. Track 3 is In Search of Love. One of the singles from this album, in fact, the lead single from this album, once again written by the trio of Manilow, Rice, and Rich. So we can pretty safely assume that all three of these songs started to come out around the same time, which I think is interesting that these three songs were chosen to lead off the album order. This is absolutely one of my favorites from this record, and I think one of the reasons that is because it features such a grandiose sound. It's so epic, and it's not epic in a way like his power ballads are. It's epic in just the full, massive sound of all of the synthesizers and drums coming together, and it's one of my favorite bridges on a Manilow Deep track. The "Don't make me beg, don't make me plead," that part is one of my favorites on this. I really, really, really think that this song should have been a hit. What do you think, Barry?
Yeah, it really should have been a hit. And to dig into the commentary that we have from Barry Manilow on this track, what he said, quoting from him, he said, "Howie Allen and I again wrote this song, and we made it a very up-tempo pop record, and of course we produced it so that it was a very full production. I wanted it to go something like an R&B record, and I like what it sounds like. I think it's a really nice combination of the kind of music that I make and a nice contemporary track as well." And I agree with that assessment, because in listening to this, yes, again, it's still using a lot of the hallmarks of the Barry Manilow sound in how he were to compose a melody, create chords, and in this case modulate it again and repeat the chorus in a higher key at the end. That's something very common. One of the things that I really wanted to highlight is when this was performed live, I felt that he had such a powerful connection to the lyrics. This is something that a lot of people could go look up. There was a time when he appeared on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, and he sang In Search of Love. I think it's one of the greatest performances of this song. It's also performed extraordinarily well on the Live in Japan video, which was recorded in 1985.
I mean, we talk a lot on this program about how Manilow performs, how he connects to a lyric and what it means, and he tries to act it out on stage. I think this particular song may be the very best example of him deploying that method in his shows. It's clear that whatever he has thought of, he is really dialed into it. And unfortunately, this is a song that really did not leave this era. He did, however, do it a couple of times during the Live on Broadway era. We know he definitely did it in 1990 when he was at the London Palladium, but after that, I don't think there were any other performances of this song. But like you said, Logan, this one should have been a hit. I really think this would have had an impact if it was given a chance.
And it's funny you bring up the Johnny Carson performance. That was where I first heard this song. As we were flipping channels one night and we saw that it was a re-airing of an episode with Barry Manilow on the Johnny Carson show, and we watched, and that was my introduction to the song. So you saying that was one of the greatest performances of it ever, that's how I was introduced to it. And now I could probably safely say, looking at the track list, that this one is my favorite track on the RCA record of 85. All right, we're going to move on here. We're still not even done with side one. Please bear with us. You know the drill at this point. Here we go. Track number 4 is He Doesn't Care, But I Do. This is the first song on the record that Manilow does not have a songwriting credit on, but we don't have to play our Clive Davis game today. It was written by Kevin DeSimone and Robin Green. Once again, classic piano intro. Classic Manilow. Nothing needs to be said about that. This is another track that the vocal reminds me of something that could have been Here Comes the Night. It could have been this is another one, just like It's All Behind Us Now, that is kind of a continuation of the Here Comes the Night vibe, I think, because this vocal is in the stratosphere by the end of the tune. And I wanted to ask you, Barry, because we have done a lot of research into this. By the way, we have a Google form that you can find from us where you can fill out if you've seen Barry Manilow live and tell us what songs you heard live at your shows, because we're very interested in all that stuff. We've done all sorts of research into all the different eras. Have you ever heard of record of him doing this one live? Because I haven't. Barry, have you?
No, we have no record that he's ever performed this live.
Which is interesting to me because this one got the music video treatment. We'll talk about that in a separate thing, not in this discussion. But it's interesting that they would do something like that with the music video, and he wouldn't try it just once. So if you happen to have seen this live, please find our forum, find our email, Manilow Method on social media. Please tell us, because I'd be very interested to see what other songs from this album he played live.
Hi everybody, it's Barry here. I hope you're enjoying today's program. After we recorded the episodes that you're listening and watching right now, we learned through our research that He Doesn't Care But I Do was performed by Barry Manilow live in concert at least once on the Paradise Tour. Now back to the show.
Barry, lay it on me. What do you think of this one?
Yeah, so like you said, this song vocally is in the stratosphere. It is a power ballad, and like you said, it is actually one of 2 outside songs on the original release of the Manilow RCA record. And to understand why this is, we can go to the commentary that Barry Manilow wrote about this track. He said it was written by Kevin DeSimone and his wife, Robin Green, and they work with him in his band. They're dear friends of mine, he says, and they're so talented, just so talented. They showed me this song and I loved it. I didn't want to record an outside piece of material unless I just knew it had a shot at being a hit single, because one of my goals for this album was to try and write the music to all of the tracks. I've never done that, but I just loved this one so much that I had to put it on. Again, it's a much more aggressive ballad than I've ever done before, and the difference for me on this particular song is that it sounds like Barry Manilow and his band instead of Barry Manilow and some orchestra playing behind me. So I really like what this feels like. So we have this directly from the source. He was trying for a hit single on this song.
And maybe that could be a reason why the vocals were so high, because you listen to what's on the radio and you listen to Journey or any of those artists. They're up in the stratosphere, so he's competing with the big boys. But I think he competes very well. And when you listen to this song, I think again, he tries to find songs that he can connect lyrically to. Yeah. And so I feel that he would not have done this if he did not find a way to connect to what this song might mean for him and project that out into either an audience or people at home. Now, one thing, I'll make one note about this, and we won't spend too much time on this, but if you watch the music video, you will notice that it is different because it is longer. And we will explain why that is. Like Logan said, we will do a bonus episode and talk about the music videos specifically, but he doesn't care, but I do. Again, another pop record that is in the style of Barry Manilow, because again, it's a love song with a distinctive piano intro, like you mentioned, and it modulates and changes the key of the chorus and repeats it again in a higher key at the very end, and then it repeats and fades. So that's the classic Manilow formula right there, except modernized for the 1980s.
So before we move on, I just wanted to mention, in his little quote there that you read, he mentions that it sounds like Barry Manilow and his band. Another reason to believe that maybe they tried it out on tour. Just saying. Somebody give us something, please. Somebody give us something. All right, we're gonna talk about one more track here, and then we're gonna cut this one off so it's not a million years long. We're gonna talk about the end of side one, and then here in the near future, you're going to see part 2 of this conversation. We're going to pause for a second, come back, and film the rest of our discussion. So our last track for today's discussion is track 5, Some Sweet Day. This is co-written by Barry Manilow and Adrian Anderson. Adrian Anderson is a name that we know very well on this. We got a John Pondell acoustic guitar intro on this track. This is very interesting because this song was very prominently featured in the live show for this era. Most often it was the Act 1 closer, which is interesting because this is the Side 1 closer. So he obviously held this song in very high regard. And it's very interesting because you have almost these Latin percussion sounds happening throughout the track. In the beginning and the end is where they're kind of most prevalent, but throughout the song you're hearing all these different sounds. And I think it's very interesting for him to try to approach a power ballad from a different stance, because you could call this a power ballad, but it's a little more up-tempo than a power ballad. It's kind of like just kind of a motivational sounding song, I guess is how you can kind of describe it. But it's very interesting, and I have to say it's one of the more unique tracks to me. This one stood out the most as far as things that were happening in the arrangement and instruments they were using. Barry, what is your personal connection to Some Sweet Day?
So it's obviously one of my personal favorites. As a kid, I always loved the song. I loved this idea that it really... Manilow liked to say, I'm not a hopeless romantic, I'm a hopeful romantic. And this song is for a hopeful romantic. And with this song in particular, you mentioned it, that this song was premiered live long before it was ever recorded. In fact, it was premiered at the opening of the Paradise Tour in 1984, a year before this album was released. And to go to Manilow's commentary, he says, Some Sweet Day is the song that I've gotten the most requests on to record than any other song I've ever sung. I've been singing Some Sweet Day in concert for over a year now because Adrian and I wrote it about a year and a half ago, and I immediately put it in the show, and it started to get requests right away, and I've never gotten that many requests for a song that wasn't on a record. So that's really interesting to say that he knew he had something really special with this song before he even entered the studio. Of course, that adds a lot of pressure because now you have to live up to the hype that the live performances have delivered to the audience. And I think he met that moment very well. It's a really unique arrangement because, like you said, it has a little bit of a Latin feel. It was such a staple of the shows. And now in preparing for this show,
us preparing for this show, we really believed that this was a song that had never left this era. However, Logan, you should tell them what we found.
So we want to give a shout out super fast to a very awesome Barry Manilow fan. Her name is Dana Holland. She has a website that you can go to and read about all of the shows that she has seen over the years. And Barry and I have spent hours upon hours upon hours combing through her site and taking notes on what she saw, and she's helped our research greatly. So thank you, Dana. If any of you know Dana, make sure our thanks gets back to her. We read that towards the end, I'm going to pull it up here as I'm talking, towards the end of his run at the Hilton, the Las Vegas Hilton in the mid to late 2000s, towards the end, there was a segment in the show where he would sit down at the piano and just ask the audience, does anybody have anything they want to hear? Usually he would go into what he would want to do, but every now and then he would do something, and I just found it on November 27th, 2009. He asked the audience, hey, you got something you want to hear? And somebody yelled Some Sweet Day, and he just played a few bars. He played what he could remember off the top of his head. And something that caught my eye in this, and listen, this tinfoil hat's going on for the first time on this episode. In Dana's notes, it said that when he started playing it, Mike Lent, his guitar player, started to join him. And when I read that, my first thought was, why does Mike know that song? Because Mike joined on the Clicker Tour in 97, and he's been with them since then. He wasn't with them before that, and if Some Sweet Day never left the era that we're talking about, when did Mike have to learn it? Did they use it in rehearsal at some point? Did they think about, again, this is purely speculation, but it's worthy speculation because it has to do with what we're talking about. So that's the most recent reference we know of in a live show to this song, and I doubt he's referenced it since then, since it is such a deep track. But I think that might have to do it for today's discussion. This is part one of the Manilow RCA album. We're going to pause here for a bit, and then we're going to film part two. You're going to see that here in the coming days. Thank you all so much for tuning into this. You can find us on social media at The Manilow Method, themanilowmethod@gmail.com. Visit our Barry Manilow Live Google form. Tell us when you've seen him live and what songs you've heard. I'm Logan Allen, that is Barry Harris, and we will see you very soon for part two of this discussion on The Manilow Method.